All right, there it goes. Okay. So this is a story that I believe we all know, we all hear. We hear from, I know I'm trying to get the light, I can't tell what the light's doing. This is a story that we all know, but could you imagine it today? Closely gathered with 5,000 people, and I would venture to say, you don't necessarily know the others or where they've been. They're probably not your shelter-in-place family. Can you imagine that today here in Laramie? No hand sanitizer, probably no face coverings. But given the time, there probably was some type of head or face covering because they were in the desert, but they were not required. Just reading this in today's context and in our lives that we are living today kind of is scary. This also makes me wonder, are we handling this pandemic as Jesus wants us to handle it? It's a theological question I don't know that we will ever have an answer to. The feeding of the 5,000. We hear it from early on in our life in the church. We hear it in Sunday school as children. And most likely we hear it every 3 years when it comes up in the lectionary. All 4 of our gospel writers include it, or some version of this story. And it's a powerful story. A story that many believe is at the core of the church. One aspect of taking care of the less of these. So why is this so important that all 4 of the gospel writers included it? Well, many scholars suppose that it's such a foundational story because of the importance of the Eucharist to the early church. And I can go along with that. You know, food from God to feed all. Growing up Catholic and going to Catholic school, Saturday was the only day I did not receive communion. And sometimes, when I was foolish enough to sign up to be the altar boy on Saturday, I was there on Saturday as well. Taking communion is a fundamental part of my church experience. It was as a child and it is now as an adult. When you read this or hear this, you see that Jesus is not the one that feeds them all. Jesus says to his disciples, feed them. Well, that's interesting, don't you think? Most of the miracles in the Bible are performed by Jesus. This is one that he implements, but he does not carry out. Or does he? You know, it's not written directly that he does, but it must be performed by God, no? As I've said before, communion is of great importance to me in my church and spiritual life. As you can tell, I write or use a different blessing most every time that we share the meal. I prepare for the meal. Sometimes it takes me a bit of time to get it all written. So I read it usually, so I don't forget anything. I'm old, my memory goes. I write it today and I can't remember it tomorrow. So I read it. And on the mornings when we share the meal, I get to go get the bread. I contemplate what will happen when we share that meal together. Feeding us is like feeding the 5,000 to me. Now, there are many churches that have taken our current COVID approach to communion, which is to do it together, yet individually. Now that I'm doing communion on the first Wednesday evening, which is coming up, 7 o'clock, via Zoom, I feel that that's safer than us all trying to bring communion elements here on Sunday morning. Safer for us, easier for us. But I really hope that you will join us for communion on Wednesday. And if you can't, you know, you can always call me. I can come by your house any day and do communion. Communion is not reserved for the first Sunday of each month. When you read this passage in any of the Gospels, you'll notice one thing. We never know how it happens. It just happens. Jesus says, you give them something to eat. It's a command that he gives to the disciples. And the disciples take a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. And after Jesus blesses those loaves and those fishes, they feed the crowd. And there are leftovers. Imagine that. Much the same as I, through God, bless our bread and our elements on Sunday morning or on Wednesday evening. Maria Mallory White says that bread is the star of the show in this gospel. Jesus shows his imminent ability to meet human need through real-time supernatural powers. I see the teacher who commands, you give them something to eat, and then does just that, educating the disciples in the eternal resources at hand in the kingdom. This passage, in most versions of many different versions of the Bible, is almost always titled, Jesus feeds the 5,000. But when you read that, did you notice anything? Did you notice as Carol read this? Did you notice who Jesus feeds? Jesus does not feed anyone. Jesus gives instructions to his disciples to take the few resources that they have at hand and solve a great need with those few resources. Jesus, like the teacher he shows us he is, instructs the disciples to feed the masses. The 12 feed the 5,000, and they are called to action by Jesus. Now think about it. We are often called to action by Jesus. Today there is famine and flood and drought. There's disease, any number of natural or man-made disasters that need our attention. On top of all of those, there are two pandemics raging in our country, COVID and racism. We are dealing with a multitude of pandemics in our lives. Think of those in Texas and Florida and Puerto Rico and the islands that are getting hit by hurricanes. The season is just starting and we've got an unnatural number of named storms already. Top of everything else, it's going to be a tough year. We as Christians are called upon by Jesus to be his disciples, to be the disciples for him. We are called to act as the disciples did in this reading, to take care of the masses with instruction and guidance from God. We are called to be the church, as the banner says, be the church. Protect the powerless, reject racism, forgive others. Some other things I can't read backwards. But it's all right there in just a few words. Read it. I believe that there are many things to be learned from this story, but I'm going to give you three that I think are really important, and I think maybe we should all remember them. But you may come up with your own list. If you do, you can share it with me if you would like. You know the email. Most of you have my text number. Number one is God is love, which is shown in this story by feeding of the 5,000 with just a few meager resources. Jesus calls upon God when he blesses those things, those elements, those fish and those loaves. Number two is that being a disciple is a responsibility from God. Being disciples is a responsibility that we all have, that we all share. Jesus doesn't doubt us or doubt our abilities. We are the doubters. If we do not allow doubt to cloud our minds, we can accomplish great things. Being disciples means that we not only decide who should get our money, but it involves getting in the work in the midst of those 5,000. Excuse me. We all have an hour or two to give. And when we give, we reap rewards from that giving. And I don't mean just on a personal level, but on the lives of those that we touch. I don't want to diminish how you might feel if you help or volunteer, but quite often, the greatest reward is the way in which you impact the lives of others, how those that you help are impacted. There's an article in yesterday's paper about Mike at Interfaith who retired. And there's a story in there. He says that on one of the days that he was just starting to volunteer, a woman came in and said she was tired. She didn't have much. She was tired of keeping her head afloat. It's hard when you have nothing to feed your family. And she lost her children. But at Mike's retirement party, she came back years later to tell him she'd gotten her children back. She'd gotten her life straightened out. And she was going to be an interfaith volunteer. Now that's a story. That's an impact in somebody's life. Brought tears to Mike's eyes. Brought tears to mine when I read it in the paper. But that's how your giving has an impact way beyond you. You may never know what happens. Simply saying good morning to someone or holding the door open for someone may brighten their day. And the third thing I want to talk about is that God gives us power to work for good in the world. Just as the disciples are given the task, you feed them. You feed those 5,000. We are given the task to minister, to be, and to do. Think of the priesthood of all believers. That is each and every one of us. So each of those three things, they could be talked about. Each of them could be a sermon series, not just a sermon, or not just part of this sermon. But think about them. Think about what I've said today. Remember, Jesus gives us instructions, as he gave instructions to those original 12 disciples. We have a responsibility to listen to those instructions, but we have a greater responsibility to follow through on those instructions. What if the disciples simply said to Jesus, "There's too many here, we're going shopping in town, good luck"? I would venture to say that the story wouldn't be in all four of the Gospels if that was the end. I doubt it would be even in the Bible at all. But since Jesus was a teacher, we would miss one of his teaching moments. When you are faced with the ability to help others, to do good, to be the disciple for Jesus, the disciple that Jesus and God wants us to be, remember that you are the one that has the power to do good in the world. So I ask you, take that power, embrace that power, and do good in the world so that you too can take some meager resources and feed 5,000. Now, some practical points, like there are so many people in this time of need that are facing food insecurity. I believe the number at Interfaith is that they're up like 180% of need. So there are some realities that we are facing today. wouldn't it be nice if we lived in a world where we could just say feed them and they were fed? Where we didn't need Food Bank of the Rockies, we didn't need Interfaith Good Samaritan, we didn't need the soup kitchen. Wouldn't that be nice? So remember, there are always volunteer opportunities at all of the places around town. There's always opportunity to donate, give money, to donate and give food. There are always opportunities for us to be disciples, for us to feed the 5,000, for us to hear that command of you feed them, you take care of them. I hope that we all can do that and that we can continue to do that together. Go in peace. And as I say, you know, our worship has ended, but our service is beginning. And I truly mean that. Go in peace. Go and serve. Go and feed. Maybe not 5,000, but help if you can. Amen. Now I have to find where
How to turn off the recording.
Zoom is so that I can turn off the recording. Because I don't know where anything is. I hate this thing because I don't know